April 26, 1941, over the waters south of Crete, the assault craft cut through pre-dawn swells, engines muffled by canvas wraps. Aboard HMS Glengale, 42 Royal Marines of a battalion checked rifles in near darkness. Intelligence reported minimal German presence on the southern shore. 3 platoons, perhaps 4. The reality, decoded 3 hours earlier in Alexandria, suggested otherwise. Elements of the 5th Mountain Division had reinforced overnight. The Marines' objective was Hill 107, overlooking Malemi Airfield. Casualty estimates had ranged from 12 to 18%. By 0820 hours, recorded losses would reach 31% before the first objective. In the operations log filed May 2nd, one line appears without elaboration. Initial resistance exceeded all prior Mediterranean engagements. The sea was calm, the intelligence was not. The morning of April 22, 1941, Sergeant Major Anthony Harrison stood on the stone jetty at Suda Bay, Crete, watching supply crates swing from the deck of HMS York. The air smelled of diesel and salt. His men, drawn from the Royal Marines' Mobile Naval Base Defence Organisation, had arrived 72 hours earlier with orders to prepare defensive positions along the northern coast. Harrison's unit, officially designated MNBDO II, comprised engineers, anti-aircraft crews, and 3 infantry companies trained for amphibious raids. Their equipment manifests listed 20 Bren guns, 8 Boys anti-tank rifles, and ammunition reserves calculated for 14 days of sustained action. The reality of supply lines in the eastern Mediterranean meant half that. Harrison had served in Norway the previous year, where German mountain troops had moved faster than intelligence predicted. He folded the briefing sheet into his tunic pocket. The paper listed German forces on the Greek mainland at approximately 20,000. Reconnaissance suggested build-up near airfields. No one used the word invasion in official correspondence, but the defensive perimeter around Suda Bay had tripled in 72 hours. Across the bay, Cretan labourers dug trenches in rocky soil. Harrison counted the boats. There weren't enough. April 23rd, dawn. Corporal Joe Bennett moved along the ridge above Suda Bay, marking machine gun positions with white stones. The sun broke over the hills to the east, illuminating the bay in sharp horizontal light. Bennett had transferred to the MNBDO from HMS Warspite 6 months earlier, trained in naval gunnery before learning infantry tactics in a compressed 8-week course at Portsmouth. His notebook contained firing arcs, ammunition counts, and estimated approach vectors based on topographic maps issued by the Royal Engineers. The ground was limestone, difficult for digging but excellent for observation. Bennett noted the distances: 400 metres to the beach, 800 to the nearest cover an advancing force might use, 1,200 to the tree line. The Bren positions would overlap fields of fire at 600 metres. Standard doctrine. He recorded it in pencil. The manual specified ink, but pencils didn't run in seawater. By mid-morning, Bennett's squad had emplaced 3 positions, each dug to a depth of 1 metre. Shallower than regulation, but the rock beneath refused further progress. A runner arrived with new orders: extend the perimeter westward another kilometre. Bennett checked his map. That sector had been marked, quote, low priority in the original plan. Someone in headquarters had changed their assessment. The runner didn't know why. April 24th, late afternoon. Marine James Cooper sat in the shadow of a Matilda tank, cleaning his rifle. The weapon was a Lee Enfield No. 4 MKY, serial number stamped into the receiver, T47382. Cooper had fired it twice on the range at Plymouth, 50 rounds total, before embarkation. The Army sergeant had told him the rifle was reliable to 800 yards in trained hands. Cooper's hands were trained for ship maintenance, not marksmanship. He'd volunteered for the MNBDO because it promised shore duty. The irony wasn't lost on him. Around him, 30 men prepared defensive positions near the village of Platanius, west of Suda Bay. Headquarters had designated this forward position Epsilon in dispatches. Locals called it the Coast Road. Civilian refugees moved eastward in scattered groups, carrying belongings wrapped in cloth. Cooper watched an old man leading a donkey laden with furniture. The man glanced at the Marines but didn't stop. That evening, Harrison gathered the platoon near a stone wall. His briefing was factual. German forces had secured airfields in southern Greece. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights over Crete had increased from 4 per day to 17. Naval intelligence assessed invasion probability at 70% within 1 week. Harrison didn't speculate. He issued ammunition, 50 rounds per man, 2 magazines for the Bren guns, 6 grenades per section. Cooper recounted his allocation twice. The numbers matched. May 20th, 08:15 hours. The air filled with the sound of aircraft engines. Cooper, now stationed at Hill 107 overlooking Malemi Airfield, counted the formations. 3 waves, 9 aircraft each, approaching from the northwest. They were Junkers Ju-52 transports, flying at approximately 400 meters altitude. The anti-aircraft crews opened fire at 0817. Tracers arced upward. 1 transport broke formation, trailing smoke, and descended toward the sea. The others continued. At 0820, parachutes bloomed against the morning sky. White canopies, hundreds of them, drifting toward the airfield and surrounding hills. Harrison's voice cut through the noise. "Hold sectors, wait for ground contact." The German paratroopers of Fallschirmjäger Regiment 3 landed in scattered groups. Some hit the ground within 200 meters of Marine positions. Others drifted into olive groves beyond effective range. The initial exchange lasted 4 minutes. Cooper fired 12 rounds, aiming at movement in the trees. He didn't know if he hit anyone. The Bren gun to his left fired in controlled bursts, the sound sharp and mechanical. By 0835, the first wave had landed. Intelligence estimates, filed 3 days earlier, had predicted a paratrooper force of 800. Actual deployment, calculated from post-battle counts and German records, exceeded 2,500. Bennett, positioned 30 meters downslope, waved Cooper forward. They moved between cover points, keeping low. A German paratrooper emerged from behind a stone wall, rifle raised. Bennett fired twice. The man fell. Neither Marine spoke. May 20th, 10:30 hours. The volume of fire intensified as German forces consolidated their landing zones. Harrison's platoon, now reduced to 31 effectives, held positions along the eastern edge of Hill 107. Ammunition expenditure had exceeded projections. 800 rounds in the first 2 hours. Resupply hadn't arrived. Harrison sent Bennett back toward Suda Bay with a runner to request additional ammunition and report German strength. Bennett moved through the olive groves, staying off the road. The distance was 3 kilometers. He estimated 40 minutes. At 11:15, Bennett reached a Royal Engineers checkpoint, where a captain reviewed a tactical map under canvas shelter. Bennett delivered his report. German forces estimated at battalion strength, advancing on multiple axes. Marine positions holding but ammunition critical. The captain noted the information and radioed brigade headquarters. The response came within 6 minutes. Resupply convoy departing at 1200 hours. Bennett started back at 11:25 carrying 2 boxes of 303 ammunition and 4 Mills bombs. He didn't make it. At 11:47, a German patrol intercepted him 400 meters from friendly lines. The engagement lasted less than 1 minute. A Royal Engineer Corporal, observing from a ridge, recorded the event in his duty log. Marine courier engaged by enemy patrol, approximate strength 6, grid reference 647293, outcome unknown. Bennett's body was recovered May 22nd during a local counterattack. The ammunition boxes lay beside him, unopened. His notebook, found in his tunic, contained coordinates, ammunition counts, and a single personal entry. Mother's birthday, May 18th. Send letter. The letter was never written. May 20th, 1400 hours. Cooper watched the resupply convoy arrive under mortar fire. 3 trucks moving fast along the coast road unloaded ammunition crates before withdrawing. Harrison distributed the supplies, 30 rounds per man, 1 additional magazine for each Bren gun, 4 mortar bombs. It wasn't enough for sustained defense, but it extended their capability another 6 hours at current expenditure rates. The German forces had reorganized, establishing machine gun positions in buildings near the airfield. Their mortars fired with increasing accuracy, adjusting after each salvo. At 14:30, orders arrived. From brigade, withdraw to secondary positions east of Maleme village, maintain observation on airfield approaches. Harrison assessed the tactical situation. Withdrawal meant abandoning Hill 107, the primary observation point. Holding meant probable encirclement within 12 hours. The orders were clear. At 14:45, the Marines began movement in 2 groups, alternating cover. Cooper carried a wounded lance corporal, Private Davies, whose leg had been shattered by shrapnel. The man weighed 70 kilograms. The distance to the new position was 800 meters across open ground. They moved in rushes, 10 meters at a time. German fire followed their movement. A bullet struck the ground near Cooper's boot, throwing up dust. He didn't stop. They reached the secondary position at 15:18. Davies was transferred to a medical post. Cooper never saw him again. The official casualty report, filed May 25th, listed Davies as evacuated to Alexandria, prognosis uncertain. Hospital records show he survived, returning to Britain in July. Cooper wouldn't learn this for 3 years, May 21st, 0600 hours. The airfield at Maleme had fallen during the night. German transports began landing at first light, disgorging troops and equipment directly onto the runway. Harrison, observing from a stone farmhouse 1,500 meters east, counted 23 landings between 0605 and 0720. Each aircraft carried approximately 40 soldiers or equivalent cargo. The mathematics were clear. German reinforcement rate now exceeded Allied capacity to contain. Brigade headquarters issued new orders at 0745, established offensive line along the Tavronaitis River, prevent German expansion eastward. The Royal Marines consolidated, with New Zealand infantry units holding positions along the riverbank. The combined force numbered approximately 400 effectives. They faced an estimated 2,000 German troops with air support. Cooper dug into the riverbank, the soil softer here than the limestone hills. His entrenching tool struck something solid, a metal canister, rusted, probably Italian from an earlier conflict. He set it aside and continued digging. By 0900, the position was complete, 18 inches deep, firing step carved into the forward face, drainage channel cut toward the river. Textbook. The German advance began at 10:15 with mortar bombardment, followed by infantry assault across open ground south of the river. Harrison's Marines engaged at 400 meters. The Bren guns fired in sustained bursts, the barrels heating rapidly in the morning sun. Cooper fired methodically, 1 shot every 3 seconds, aiming for movement. His rifle grew hot. He counted his remaining ammunition, 22 rounds. At 10:47, the German assault stalled. They withdrew to covered positions, regrouping. The Marines had held, but Harrison knew the mathematics. The next assault would be stronger, May 21st, 1400 hours. A runner from brigade arrived with orders for withdrawal. All units fall back to Suda Bay perimeter. Establish final defensive line. The decision had been made at corps level following reconnaissance reports showing German forces now exceeded 5,000 troops ashore, with continued air landings throughout the day. Harrison gathered his men. 23 remained combat effective, 6 wounded but mobile. The withdrawal began at 14:30, moving eastward along the coast road. Civilian refugees clogged the route, slowing military movement. Cooper helped an elderly woman lift her possessions onto a cart, then continued. The afternoon heat was oppressive, temperatures exceeding 35 degrees Celsius. Men drank from canteens, then refilled at a village fountain. The water tasted of minerals and copper. At 16:20, German aircraft appeared, Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters conducting strafing runs along the road. The Marines scattered into olive groves. Cooper lay flat beneath a tree, hands over his head. The sound of cannon fire was distinct, a rapid hammering, different from small arms. The attack lasted 90 seconds. When silence returned, Cooper counted 3 civilians dead on the road, 1 Marine wounded in the shoulder. They continued moving. By 1800, Harrison's unit reached the Suda Bay perimeter, where Royal Engineers had established fallback positions in the hills overlooking the bay. The defensive line stretched approximately 6 kilometers, manned by remnants of British, Australian, and New Zealand units. Ammunition stocks had been consolidated, approximately 40 rounds per rifle, reduced magazine capacity for machine guns. Harrison reported to a major from the Welch Regiment who commanded the sector. The major's orders were direct: hold for 48 hours to allow evacuation operations. After that, situation reassessment. The major didn't specify what reassessment meant. May 26th evening. The evacuation had begun 3 nights earlier. Royal Navy destroyers arrived after dark, embarking troops from beaches south of Suda Bay. Cooper waited in a ravine with 17 other Marines, part of the rear guard holding positions to cover the withdrawal. The harbour installations at Suda had been demolished that morning. Fuel depots, ammunition stores, workshops. Explosions echoed across the bay at irregular intervals as demolition teams completed their work. Harrison moved among the men, checking equipment and distributing final rations. 1 tin of bully beef per man, ship's biscuits, tea. No hot food for 36 hours. Cooper opened the tin with his bayonet and ate mechanically. The food tasted of metal and salt. Orders arrived at 2015, moved to embarkation point at 2200, maintain noise discipline, carry wounded. Between now and then, hold current positions against any German probe. The night was clear, stars visible despite a quarter moon. Cooper could hear the sea, a constant rhythm against the shore. At 2140, Harrison gave the signal. The Marines moved downslope in single file, weapons slung, carrying stretchers with wounded. The path was steep, rocky, requiring both hands in places. Cooper slipped once, caught himself, continued. They reached the beach at 22:08. A destroyer lay offshore, barely visible. HMS Hero, according to the naval officer coordinating embarkation. Small boats ferried men from beach to ship in groups of 20. Cooper's group embarked at 2335. The boat crew were Royal Navy ratings, working efficiently in darkness. Nobody spoke. The boat reached Hero at 2348. Cooper climbed the scramble net, his rifle slung across his back. The deck was crowded with evacuated troops. He found a space near a ventilator and sat. The ship departed at 0:15, May 27th. Crete faded into darkness astern. Cooper didn't look back. May 27th, aboard HMS Hero. The destroyer navigated southward toward Alexandria at 28 knots. Cooper stood on deck watching the wake, white foam trailing behind in the darkness. Around him, exhausted men slept where they could. On deck, against bulkheads, in passageways. The ship's complement, designed for 160 crew, now carried 412 personnel. A naval rating distributed water in tin cups. Cooper drank, rinsed his mouth, drank again. His uniform was caked with dust and dried sweat. Someone nearby was smoking, the smell of Navy-issue tobacco mixed with diesel fumes. At 03:20, the ship's alarm sounded. Aircraft approaching from the north. Men scrambled for cover as Luftwaffe bombers emerged from the darkness. The ship's anti-aircraft guns opened fire, tracers forming geometric patterns against the sky. Cooper pressed himself against a bulkhead. The attack lasted 4 minutes. No hits recorded, but near misses sent water cascading over the deck. When silence returned, men resumed their positions. The destroyer continued south. By dawn, they were beyond effective range of German aircraft. Harrison found Cooper near the forward gun mount and sat beside him. Neither spoke immediately. The sea was calm, the morning light turning the water grey-blue. Harrison eventually said, "Bennett didn't make it." Cooper nodded. He'd suspected but hadn't asked. Harrison continued, 37 didn't make it. Another 12 wounded serious enough for hospital. The mathematics of the campaign. MNBDO II had deployed to Crete with 119 effectives. 62 were being evacuated. Harrison didn't elaborate. The official after-action report, filed June 4th at Alexandria, would list these figures alongside operational assessments and equipment losses. But aboard Hero, in the grey morning light, the numbers meant names. Bennett, Davies, Stevens, MacDonald, Thompson. Men who'd trained together, fought together. Cooper looked out at the sea. There was nothing to say. June 2nd, Alexandria. Cooper stood in formation at the Royal Navy barracks, wearing a clean uniform issued from the stores. His original uniform had been disposed of. Too damaged, too filthy for salvage. The formation comprised survivors of MNBDO II, now being reorganized and re-equipped for reassignment. A Royal Marines colonel addressed them, reading from prepared remarks. Exemplary conduct, successful rearguard action, upheld traditions of the Corps. Cooper listened without reaction. The colonel concluded with notification of decorations. Harrison would receive the Distinguished Service Order, 3 others the Military Medal. Awards would be presented at a later date. Formation dismissed. Cooper walked to the barracks, where letters from home were being distributed. He received 3, 2 from his mother, dated April, and 1 from his sister, dated May. They knew nothing of Crete, asked routine questions about weather and food. Cooper sat on his bunk and began writing responses. He described Alexandria briefly, the harbour, the heat, the crowded streets. He didn't mention Crete. What would he say? That he'd fired a rifle at men he never saw clearly? That Bennett had been killed carrying ammunition? That they'd lost? He set the letter aside. A corporal entered the barracks with reassignment orders. MNBDO II was being reconstituted, some personnel transferring to other units, others remaining with the formation for upcoming operations in North Africa. Cooper's name appeared on the North Africa list. Deployment to Tobruk, date to be confirmed. He folded the order and placed it in his locker. That evening he walked along the Alexandria waterfront. Merchant ships lay at anchor in the harbour, cranes working despite the late hour. The war continued, expanding across North Africa and the Mediterranean. Crete was already becoming history, being analysed in operational summaries and strategic assessments. Cooper watched the harbour lights reflect on dark water. Tomorrow he'd return to duty, preparing for the next operation. Tonight, he simply watched the lights. July 15th, Tobruk perimeter. Cooper crouched in a sandbagged position overlooking the coastal road, the desert heat shimmering in waves across flat terrain. The siege of Tobruk had entered its 4th month. MNBDO personnel had been integrated with Australian infantry units defending the perimeter, their amphibious training now applied to desert warfare. The adaptation had been documented in weekly situation reports. Marines trained for shipborne operations now conducted desert patrols, maintained static defences, and endured conditions foreign to their original purpose. Cooper's section rotated between forward positions and reserve areas on a 4-day cycle. Today was day 2 of forward duty. At 14:30, German artillery began systematic bombardment of the sector. Standard afternoon routine, predicted and prepared for. Cooper pressed himself against the sandbags, waiting. The bombardment lasted 17 minutes, firing approximately 40 rounds. One shell landed 20 meters short, throwing sand and shrapnel against the position. When silence returned, Cooper checked his equipment. Rifle functional, ammunition intact, water bottle half empty. He rationed the remaining water. 2 mouthfuls now saved the rest for evening. The temperature reached 42 degrees Celsius by mid-afternoon. Harrison, now promoted to warrant officer, visited the position at 16:30, bringing mail and a water resupply. Cooper received 1 letter. His mother, dated June, acknowledging his previous correspondence from Alexandria. She wrote about home, about his younger brother joining the army, about rationing and queues, normal life, impossibly distant. Harrison asked if Cooper had any supply requests. Cooper shook his head. What would he request? They had what they needed: ammunition, water, rations. Everything else was superfluous. Harrison moved to the next position. Cooper returned to watching the desert. The landscape was featureless except for scattered rocks and the distant escarpment marking the German lines. Nothing moved in the heat. By evening, the temperature dropped to 28 degrees. Cooper ate his ration. Tinned meat, biscuits, tea brewed over a small fire. The routine continued. September 3rd, Alexandria. Cooper sat in the operations room at Royal Navy Headquarters, where MNBDO personnel attended a briefing on Mediterranean operations. A Royal Navy captain presented strategic assessments using maps and statistical charts. The presentation was factual, unemotional. Axis forces controlled Crete, Greece, and significant portions of North Africa. Allied naval operations in the eastern Mediterranean remained contested. Supply convoys to Tobruk continued despite losses. The strategic situation remained fluid, but stable. The captain detailed the Crete operations aftermath. Total Allied casualties exceeded 3,000 killed, 12,000 captured. German casualties exceeded 4,000, primarily during the airborne assault. German air superiority had been decisive. The evacuation had rescued approximately 16,000 troops. The mathematics were complete. The captain concluded with operational lessons: importance of air cover, vulnerability of static defences against airborne assault, necessity of adequate supply reserves. Cooper listened, recognizing his own experience translated into operational language. The briefing ended with notification of reassignments. MNBDO II would remain operational, with personnel rotating between garrison duties and defensive operations across the theatre. Cooper's immediate assignment: remain at Alexandria for 2 weeks, then return to Tobruk. The war had become routine. Cycles of deployment, combat, withdrawal, reorganization. He left the briefing and walked toward the barracks. The streets of Alexandria were crowded with military personnel, civilian workers, refugees. Life continued despite the war, adapting to circumstances. At the barracks, Cooper found Harrison reviewing personnel files. They discussed the briefing briefly. Harrison mentioned he'd received confirmation of his DSO, presentation scheduled for next month. Cooper congratulated him. Harrison changed the subject, asking about Cooper's family. Cooper said they were well, his brother now training in England. They talked briefly about home, then returned to duties. That evening, Cooper wrote another letter, describing Alexandria and the briefing, avoiding operational details. He sealed the envelope and left it for posting. Outside, the Mediterranean sun set over the harbour, turning the water gold and orange. Tomorrow would bring new orders, new operations. Tonight, the routine continued. The MNBDO operational records, archived at the National Archives in Kew, contain detailed after-action reports from the Crete campaign. Unit strengths, casualty figures, ammunition expenditure, withdrawal timings, all documented in typed forms and handwritten annotations. One file, marked MNBDO II, Personal Effects, Recovered Personnel, contains Bennett's notebook. The pencil entries still legible despite water damage. The coordinates he recorded matched the actual defensive positions. His ammunition counts were accurate within 3%. The final entry about his mother's birthday stands alone on the page, separated from the tactical notations by a single blank line. Cooper returned to Britain in 1943, served with commando units in Sicily and Normandy, and was demobilized in 1946. In a 1987 interview for the Imperial War Museum's Oral History Project, he described Crete as the worst week of the war. Not because of the fighting, but because we knew we were losing and had to keep fighting anyway. Harrison continued service through 1945, participating in operations in Burma and eventually retiring as a lieutenant colonel in 1952. He died in 1979. The strategic assessment of the Crete campaign concluded that German casualties, particularly among Fallschirmjäger units, were severe enough to prevent future large-scale airborne operations. The operation succeeded tactically, but influenced German strategic planning for the remainder of the war. The Royal Marines' performance received formal commendation from Royal Navy and Army commands. In the official history, published 1954, one paragraph addressed the MNBDO defensive actions. Against superior numbers and without adequate air support, these units maintained cohesion and inflicted significant casualties before conducting an orderly withdrawal. Their actions were consistent with the highest traditions of the service. The file at Kew closes with a single notation dated June 1941, author unknown. Lessons learned exceed losses sustained. File for reference. The numbers had spoken, the war had listened.